Welcome back to my channel, guys. This channel is all about painting watercolor botanicals and flowers. Today we're going to be learning how to paint 2 Valentine's Day card designs in watercolor. These are great for beginners, so if you're not super confident yet, stick around. These are great projects to learn from. Today we'll be using 90-pound cold press paper by Daler Rowney, and it's a very inexpensive pad you can find at Walmart. We're going to get into it right away, and I've taken a full sheet of the 9x12 paper and cut it down into 4 pieces, so I just quartered it, and I'm going to use one of those pieces for each card. So we're doing 2 cards in today's video, and stick around next week because we'll be doing 2 more card designs leading up to Valentine's Day. So as you can see here, I just printed off a heart shape template from the internet. I just found this on linked on Pinterest, and I will try and link the template below in the video description. And so I'm just tracing a very nice clean heart shape lightly with a mechanical pencil. I'm using just an HB. Then I'm going to go around the outside of it with masking fluid. This is my Winsor & Newton masking fluid, and this actually is quite thick, you'll notice. This is like a really old bottle of masking fluid, and I realized I need to buy some new ones, and I didn't really shake it up a lot, so you can see how thick it is on my brush there. So yours might be easier to deal with. I did make this work, and you just want to try and get a really even edge along that pencil line and actually cover the pencil line just a little bit. That way, when we paint inside in with watercolor, the watercolor is not going to go over the pencil, and then once we take the masking fluid off, we can erase the pencil, and that way we have a really nice clean design. Make sure you use an old brush and some soapy water with dish soap in it when you're putting the masking fluid on to protect the brush and keep things clean. While the masking fluid dries, I'm going to start on the next card design, which are some loose watercolor wild roses. And I'm just really lightly creating some circles. They're just circles for the position of where I want the wild rose flowers. And then I'm just kind of doing some curving lines to indicate where I want the stem and then some leaves coming off. I'm doing this very lightly because I don't want it to show through on my final painting. And I'm going to lighten it up with a kneaded eraser before I do paint over top of it. But this gives me a bit of an idea how I want my composition. I don't do well without doing any pencil. Some people can do that. It's just not something I'm good at. So now that I have that laid out, you can see I'm taking a kneaded eraser, and I am just going to lighten up a few of those lines on the first flowers that I'm going to start to paint. Now I'm taking a medium sort of pink color. I've mixed it up with permanent rose and a bit of lemon yellow, so it's a peachier pink rather than magenta. More like a light wild rose color. And I am just doing this wet on dry, and you really just want to make a squiggle, like a little squiggly shape with your brush. I'm just wiggling my brush, and you want the beginning of the petal to be narrower than the end of the petal, and I don't really want to have any regular uniform lines on the ends of the petal either. And you can definitely have them overlap. I'm just touching in a bit more darker paint while it's still wet so it spreads around. And I would encourage you to try and make your petals different concentrations of the pink color. So some are darker, some are lighter. You just let the paint run out of your brush, or you pick up new paint and then dab your brush on a paper towel to remove some of that paint. And this gives you a really nice effect without doing too much brush work. Now I'm moving on to the second flower, same thing, and I am using a number 4 round sable brush. It's a Raphael Kolinsky sable watercolor brush. Those are what I use for almost all my paintings. And you can check out my blog post all about my watercolor brushes if you'd like to get links to where I get those brushes online. Now, while these are still wet, I'm dabbing in some of the yellow in the middle, and that was quinacridone gold and yellow ochre mixed together. So you just want to dab it in, and while they're still wet, let that yellow spread out. So don't do the paint all the flowers and then do the yellow. This is probably the trickiest part about watercolor and learning is the wetness of the paper, what steps to do while the paint is wet, what steps to do while the paint is dry, and it's something that comes best just with experience. So keep practicing. If you're not getting it perfect right away, don't be hard on yourself. This is a fun project, not meant to be perfect at all. So you can see now I'm doing the same thing. Those flowers I just painted, just 2 at a time, or you could do 1 at a time, are still nice and wet. So I'm taking that nice goldy yellow color and just dabbing it into the middle, and it's spreading out and doing its own thing and naturally making that soft rose petal look. And you can see I made that other rose that I painted on the left lighter than the one on the right, and the one on the right I made shorter petals, so it looks kind of like it's turned away from us a bit. It's called foreshortening. So if you're wanting to try that out, then go ahead and make your petals a little bit shorter and shift the center of your flower. Now I'm doing the last flower. I'm dabbing in more pink on this one to have a darker center. And then I'm going to go in with that yellow again. Doesn't matter if you don't have the exact same colors I'm talking about. You just need some kind of pink, some kind of yellow. That's all you need. Now I'm dabbing my brush off. I've picked up some green, and I think that I have sort of a sap green mixed with a bit of olive green. And I'm carefully following the line that I made to make the main stem of the roses. And I'm just making sure that it lines up each time I shift over where a petal overlaps the stem. So just take your time with this, and using your brush very lightly and very upright with the point very vertical is the best way to get a nice thin line. And sorry if my hand blocks a little bit because I have to turn my brush upright so much that you can't always see the tip of my brush with this camera angle. Now I'm starting to lay in the stems and leaves. So these are the secondary stems with the leaves coming off. And I'm just using my 1-stroke painting method for this and making some leaves, just pressing the belly of the brush down and then dragging it out. And then I'm just sort of pulling out some serrations on each edge of the leaf. You could just leave them plain with no serrated edges if that's easier for you, or you can try this out too. Just make sure that you pull those edges out, those serrations out, while the leaf is still wet. I like to do it as soon as I've painted the leaf. Now I'm finishing up with the leaves, and you can see I've again made some darker and some lighter, and I've done this just with the exact same green color, but I've dabbed my brush and removed a bit of the paint. Like you can see, I just painted that one there as lighter. They're the exact same mix of paint. Just dab some paint off your brush before you paint the lighter ones. And that's my trusty paper towel. I couldn't do this style of painting without it, so do make sure you always have some nice dry paper towel beside you. Now that the roses are dry, I'm going to go in with a little bit more yellow color for the centers and stipple, just very loosely to indicate the stamens of the flowers. And I'm using yellow ochre for this, which is a sort of earthy, darker yellow. And again, I'm just picking up a sort of highly concentrated mix of it. I'm dabbing my brush just a tiny bit on the paper towel before I stipple, so there's not too much puddly paint. And then just adding more color in until I'm happy with how the centers of the flowers look. Now that that first layer of yellow is starting to dry a bit, I went in with pretty much paint right off the pan of yellow ochre and put in a few really dark specks of it to give that depth to the flowers, and I really like how that turned out. Now what I'm doing, I've switched to a smaller brush. This is my number 1. Actually, I think it's a 0. This is, again, the same Kolinsky Sable round brush by Raphael. And you can see that tiny little point. I'm just using the same green mix I used to paint the leaves, and I'm just adding a few veins and midribs to the leaves. You don't need to add them to every leaf. You don't even have to do this step if you don't want. And I'm making sure that they're not completely straight. The veins are a little bit irregular, and then I'm wetting my brush, my clean damp brush, and going over a few of them to wash them out in some areas, just so that it's not super uniform. I just want some showing through here and there. Now I'm using that same smaller brush, and I'm taking the pink mix I used to paint the roses, and I'm just doing some very delicate thin lines on the petals. Nothing too obvious, just really faint, and then again I'm rinsing my brush out and then sort of softening out some of the edges and lines, just so you get an indication and that there's not solid very apparent lines all over each petal, just a few here and there. You don't even have to do this on every petal. You could just do it on a few, or again skip this step. If you don't have a small brush with a nice fine point, that's fine too. So now we're nearing the end of the rose, and you see that it came together fairly quickly. This was all done in real time. I didn't speed any of the footage up, and it looks really nice. It would make a really nice design on a Valentine's Day card, or even a little mini painting to give to somebody. We're going to start with the next project. So I've come back to my heart-shaped drawing with the masking fluid nice and dry. You want to make sure it's very dry. Dry it with a hairdryer or leave it, and by the time you paint the entire rose project, the heart will be dry. And you can see I'm just swatching some colors here. You always want to swatch your colors before you start a new project. I didn't for the rose because I paint wild roses quite frequently, and I know the mixes I like are the light peachy pink and a green. But because this is going to be more loose and abstract, these roses inside the heart, I decided to swatch out the colors first. So I'm using my same number 4 round brush. This is wet on dry again, and I'm just making a few sort of squiggly broken spirals in the middle, and then following up with some curved shapes around that, leaving white space. And as you get further out to the outside of the rose, you want to rinse your brush and then dab it on the paper towel so you get that lighter look. And these are really, I think, the easiest roses to do. These are like the first loose watercolor flower I tried or figured out how to do. And I'm just adding in a little petal here and there peeking out from the edges, so I have a nice uniform edge with no gaps, kind of, so that it's like a nice clean heart shape around the outside. And then I added in those leaves, and I'm not concerned that the rose is still wet. I kind of want everything to bleed in together. If it does, then it does. It's just kind of going with what the water and the paint do. So again, now you can see I've rinsed that brush out. I'm getting that paler outer edge of the rose, and then I'm going to pick up some green, and again just dragging the belly of the brush and then sort of flicking it at the end. And that's how you'll get the leaves. And you can just kind of go with it. If you wanted to map this out in pencil, you could, but this is the type of thing where you just, I think, want to fill in the gaps as you go. And there I used the same green, but rinsed out a little, so I got a paler leaf. Going in for my third rose, again, you can see here, broken little curved shapes, leaving some white paper. And you do want to make sure that you have a decent amount of nice wet paint for this technique. Then I rinsed my brush, and now you can see a much paler petal forming there. And then back in with the leaves. If you are very new to watercolor, it might be a good idea just to practice on a scrap piece of paper first and just try to make like a solid page of these roses. I've done that before when I was first figuring this out, and the beauty of this is the paper we're using today is so inexpensive. It's $4 or $5 for the whole pad of this paper, so I don't feel guilty or worried at all when I mess up on this paper, which is really nice because other watercolor paper can be quite expensive. Okay, so that was pretty quick and all done in real time again. So I've filled in the entire heart shape. I'm just adding a few little flecks around the edges. And I went over and I dried this with my hairdryer, not on film. So before you remove the masking fluid, make sure that it is completely dry. Now I'm just carefully removing the masking fluid with, it's this piece of rubber you can get at an art store. It's specifically meant to remove masking fluid. Just be careful it doesn't tear your paper if your masking fluid pulls back like mine is. And just go around and remove that, and then you'll see in the next few clips here that I just use a white vinyl, clean white eraser, I should say, clean so you don't smudge, to remove any excess pencil line that might be showing. So you can see there's a little bit of pencil still. I'm just taking the masking fluid off the edges of my masking fluid remover and just cleaning it up and then putting the bits in the garbage. And that's pretty much it. I hope that you try both of these projects. Please comment below if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. And thank you so much if you made it through all the way to the end of this tutorial. I have been posting every week right now on Wednesdays at noon, so stay tuned next week for another Valentine's Day card tutorial. I'm going to do 2 other watercolor designs. So then you have 4 options for making beautiful cards, or you could just use them as postcards. If you want to make these into cards, I would just glue the watercolor on top onto like a cardstock to make your card to give to your Valentine. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you get notified every time I post a new video.